Hey, welcome back to Hey Jack. This is part two of a two-part episode on the topic of positivity. If you did not catch part one, you can catch it in the show notes below. Otherwise, we're going to pick up the conversation and hope that you guys enjoy.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the word culture because I think, if I go back to the beginning of this episode, I had mentioned positivity is one of those things. It's easy to say be positive and, but then nothing gets done. And
Yep.
what I noticed with that drops in the bucket application itself was you could hear conversations happening around the building. I'm on my lunch. I hear people, or I would even say to people, I would see something that they did, and then I might have a meeting with them next, and then I'd reference it. And it really started to spread, but it does have these overarching connections to the company as well. Like you mentioned, it
Yep.
creates a better culture, it gets others motivated. So I think it does go beyond just saying, hey, be positive.
Yep. And then as we roll here, I was reflecting there's another problem for leaders and with positivity, and they will always use this as their crutch, and they'll say, look, as a leader, I'm accountable for when mistakes happen, when problems do occur, real problems, and I have to address those problems. And a lot of times you have to focus in on an employee that might have made a mistake. And so they go to that crutch and they say, well, then I can step out of the positivity thing and, deal with the problem. And sometimes it becomes a performance issue and, they get, all this stuff. So the way I used to like to think about that situation is, well, it's it came from the Japanese, and when the
Yeah.
Japanese work in industry was embracing Lean and Six Sigma, as they so successfully did and do, they came up with a concept that an error, a mistake, or a fault in the process, an error should be thought of as a gift. Whereas most of the managers say that an error, a mistake, a fault in the process is a problem
Yeah. And a
that
lot of curse
I
words.
have to fix. Whereas the Japanese say it's a gift.
It's a
And,
gift.
and the gift is it's a clue, and it's a way to start an improvement cycle to make things better, because
Yeah.
the error shows you where to look, shows you how to fix it. So it's just a brilliant way to take a negative situation and look at it in a positive light, of course. And then they double it down with, and at least I learned this from a company in the US before I even learned it from the Japanese. I think the Japanese embrace this too. Is if you're going to do this story where errors are really a gift, you have to embrace a blame-free work environment where no one is ever blamed for a problem. Even if I made the problem, I'm not blamed for it. I'm someone who needs more training. I'm
Yeah.
someone who might have a better idea on how to do something. I'm someone who could have just plain old made a mistake. But I don't need to be blamed or
Right.
shamed, right?
Yeah.
So if you try to imagine today, if I talk to all the listeners that happen to see this and I say, can you imagine if your company embraced a blame-free work environment, what that would feel like? And I think most
Mm.
of them would say, I don't think my company knows what that means.
Yeah.
And it's true, right? It's really a golden egg would be a blame-free work environment. But you team that up with the error as a gift, then you say to leaders, that's how you approach problems with error as a gift and a blame-free work environment. Then I think they can tackle any problem with their team, and their team will be excited to help them tackle the problems, right?
Yeah.
So that's one more way to think about how to develop positivity in a leadership
Cool.
way. And so then the last one I have, the last story sort of wraps up, the goal of positivity and the type of work environment that you want. If you have all of your leaders working together on the same agenda, wealth positivity, as you know, and I will give them the shout out, Phoenix Contact has in their culture statements the word friendly, and that they want friendly interactions between their employees, their partners, and their suppliers. And it's a simple phrase in there. And I used to present the mission, vision, culture statements to training classes, to guests all the time. And I would get to that point and I would point out that word friendly.
Yeah, I remember
And I
this.
would and I would tell everybody that I ever pitched it to
It's a little
that,
friendly wager,
yeah, my little
right?
friendly wager, if they could ever find another B2B company, it had to be a big
Yeah,
B2B company
B2B.
that had friendly anywhere in their mission, vision, culture statements, I'd fly out and I'd buy them a dinner. And in my 23 years, one person did. It was actually one of our sales trainees, a new employee, who spent probably a whole weekend Googling and did find a system integrator in Houston, Texas that had friendly in their work and their culture statements. So I had one,
Just one.
but it's amazing, you know. And I used to sum it up to all the new employees. I'd say, look, it's a simple word. You don't normally see it. And the rule of thumb is, look, everybody can have a bad day every now and then. But at Phoenix Contact, we're saying you can't have a bad day every day.
Yeah.
That's just not the way we're going to go to work. And that simple concept, I think, quite frankly, is the key to the way Phoenix Contact gets its culture applause and the way it moves forward. And it's really great when it starts at the top
Yeah,
in the owners of the company saying that's the way they want it run.
yeah, and I was just about to mention that it really has to be a top-down buy-in to be authentic.
Yep.
And I spent a lot of time early in my career on the recruiting side, and that was something that I was trained to, really embrace and look for in candidates is, that positivity, that can-do attitude. You can have bad days, but and it became, it probably took me a good year or two, but then I would be able to nail it. I would be able to know like this is everyone says a company culture fit, but it was more are they a positive person? Do they have that positive,
Mm,
outlook? And, even if, in the life outside of work, they could be, grumpy or whatever their natural personality is. But when they come to, the tasks that they're going to be doing and contributing to a company, is that a positive outlook that could inspire other people? And I
yeah.
think that's a key part of positivity there, which is why there's so many layers to it that I think people just
Yeah.
kind of gloss over and say, yep, I'll be positive.
Now you just reminded me of one last story. So when I was trying to walk the talk of this friendly work environment myself, I was trying to teach my leaders that hey, we need to embrace this. It's part of the company culture and it's part of positivity, positive opinion leader. I'll never forget this. One time I'm walking down the hallway to the cafeteria and a leader was maybe 30 or 40 feet in front of me. And I saw somebody coming back the other way and they crisscrossed, they passed each other. And I noticed the employee was sort of looking up toward the center, trying to get the eyes to move toward the leader that was about to pass them. And the leader never said a peep, didn't say good morning,
Kept going.
just kept going because they didn't know the person.
Yeah.
And that was their argument. They didn't know the person.
They didn't
That's
know.
true. It's very true that you don't know the person. But so I had to have a little chat with that individual. I had to say, no, wait a minute. You're a leader. I need you spreading positive opinion, and you don't even want to say good morning to people that you pass in the hallway.
Yeah.
That's not right.
It's those small
Yeah,
interactions
those
that
little things make such a difference.
it's like any sports team, right? It's like, I hate the analogy, you're only as strong as your weakest link,
Yeah,
but company cultures are built on those small interactions when collectively everyone kind of has that same vision. I think the thing that I've been most impressed with, and this is even after I've kind of walked away from working directly in the corporate world, but now consulting and working with other companies from just different sizes, is it is incredibly difficult to embrace a great culture that people actually buy into, that's authentic as the company grows and scales.
yeah,
And that is just a testament, I think, to the processes and the commitment to this, because inside of that organization, it was always positive. And it was, through and through, people, they bought in, they, you know, that was the identity. almost. And one of the things I always said, you know, you can, whenever it comes to recruiting candidates back in, when I was doing that, you could always go out and every company can say whatever they want, and it can largely be true from the standpoint of what kind of company culture they have, what their vision is, the amenities, things like that. And the selling point that always stuck with me at Phoenix was it's like you'll feel it from day one, and you'll feel that during the interview process alone. And that stuck true. People would come in and they would feel and just see in the hallways the conversations happening, and that was always a selling point, was
Yeah.
that culture. But it wasn't them recognizing the culture. They would always say, everyone here's so friendly, is that normal or is that just for me? And I would always joke and
Exactly.
say, well, I had to make them for you, so I hope this goes well.
Exactly.
But yeah, but it's very hard, I think, as you get bigger and bigger. And I've not seen another company that had that same just friendliness, you know, across the industry. So
Yep.
with that said, to kind of wrap up on positivity, two final questions here for you. Number one, I know when you were talking about first taking this approach, in leadership, what was the initial reaction? Because you had mentioned it was always before kind of just be the, management by fear, go get them. What was that initial conversation like? Or when you went to, hey, I'm going to embrace, did you have to have that conversation, or was that just always your approach and then you kind of just
Yeah, it
migrated
was.
into it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was sort of always my approach from the beginning. I will definitely agree that I had to break some habits, starting at the top in my executive leadership team, where even in our own staff meeting, confrontation was the way you
Yeah.
got the other person to get something done that you wanted. In other words, they would use the staff meeting to not embarrass, but almost embarrass the other staff member in front of the boss, right?
Yeah.
And I had to quickly change that, right? Where the rule was you weren't allowed to discuss something in staff that was a conflicting problem unless you've already talked to the person, right? Because we want to respect each other and we want to do things in a positive way. And so it took about 3 or 4 of those conversations just within my own staff. And it also hit me, if that's how it was, I'm sure that's how it was below them.
Yeah.
It, I quickly understood the problem was big and was going to take a while. But working it with my executive staff first before I ever started preaching POL and all that kind of stuff was more important. So I did that. That was phase one, was working in the staff to make sure they understood what positive opinion leaders were, even in the staff, and how they had to work with themselves. And then we started rolling it out, and that was with the help of HR, and we turned it into programs like Drops in the Bucket, and
Okay.
that's how we rolled it out. Yeah.
Nice. And then second question kind of piggybacks on that. For those listeners that let's just say we'll give two examples here. Let's just say you have somebody that's already in a leadership role at a company, and then you have somebody in a company that is an inspiring leader. What is the advice that you would give them on this topic of positivity and leadership? And even more so, maybe if what can they do individually, because maybe they're at a company where that's not the norm, but they can
Yeah.
still control what advice would you give to those listeners?
Yeah. So it'll go back to some things we talked about already, right? So I would say the first thing you want to do is gauge the company itself, right? So if the company is a lot of negative pressure on you, I wouldn't want to try to go super fast with this, right? You're going to need to move slowly. If your company seems like a company that's open to this or one that is trying to become this, then you go hard at it. You'll flourish, right? But what I would say to the leaders, the way to embrace it or get started is, just look at your individual communications first, what you say and what you write. And the writing's
Yeah.
as important as the saying. And we all know that we've sent a text that we wish we hadn't, and we wish
Yes.
we'd have slept on it. You know what I mean? So So I would tell people to get overcritical of the way they write things, and not just to pull out a grumpy one, right? You might be sending grumpy ones. You should never send a grumpy one. But how do I take my neutral communications and make them positive? And how do I just simply compliment an employee for no reason, meaning
Yeah.
no immediate reason, but you say, hey, the other day you did this. I really appreciate that you backed that person up and did this or did that. Just out of the blue, something you wouldn't normally do, but it's valid that you could compliment somebody. Just start looking for small compliments you can give people. So the first part would be studying your communications and making small adjustments one day at a time. That's easy. It's quiet. It's not declaring you're all of a sudden going to be positive,
Yeah. It's
but it could be slowly moving your leadership in the right direction. That would be step one.
okay.
And then step two would be to make positivity your hobby, meaning read
Yeah.
about it, learn about it. And there's a great LinkedIn positivity group. So if you put positivity in the search bar, you'll find a couple of those things to follow. And there's a couple of great positivity ones in LinkedIn. So if you just start following those, of course, then we know our social media feed every morning is about
Oh yeah.
positivity and not about other stuff. So I would just make positivity my hobby with a longer term goal of getting there someday and
Yeah.
being better. And then if they start doing that, maybe their peer will ask them what they're doing, and they'll just,
Yeah.
it'll start naturally maybe snowballing if they're lucky. But
Yeah. I think it's excellent advice, and I love that approach because, as you mentioned at the start of that, if they're at a company that's, not anti-positivity, but it's going to be a big change. I think with that advice, they're working on their inner self and what they can
yeah,
control. And then eventually they, might, that could even lead them to identifying a company that is more in alignment with their positivity.
yep.
And then you can flourish even more in that environment. So
Yeah, and we
love the
we mentioned
advice.
the drops in the bucket book. There's another one. It literally is the no asshole rule. That's another good book on
I love the
positivity.
title.
It's an eye grabber. But everybody should do it their own way.
Yeah.
On making it their hobby to learn, to learn about it. And I think people are going to find it's actually so easy to do,
Yeah.
and it's so rewarding to do. It's really not as hard as people think.
Yeah. And I think hopefully if they listen to the, to this point in the episode, hopefully we distilled in them that positivity actually has layers to it, and it's not just a word as easy as, hey, go be positive in leadership, check the box, next topic. So
You bet. You bet.
great conversation today, Jack. We'll be back next week with a whole nother topic. Any parting words?
No, just go lead folks and be positive.
Be positive. Awesome. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Take care.